Hello everyone, welcome back to MalStorm Gaming. My name is Malachi Gardner, and I'm not sure if you've noticed, but I have quite a few RPG books on my shelf over here. And I really enjoy playing those games with my friends. I'm usually the DM, and I create an adventure for my friends to play through, and we just have a blast playing together. But sometimes I'm not able to get a group together, and I still want to have a game that kind of captures the essence of an RPG. In comes the Pathfinder Adventure Card Game. This game takes the core concepts of an RPG and distills it down into a card game that's playable solo. So this is the first part of my playthrough of the Pathfinder Adventure Card Game, where I'm going to be showing you how to play, and then I'm going to be playing through a game just so you see. So without further ado, let's get to the playthrough, and I hope you all enjoy the video. Hello everyone, and welcome to the first part of my playthrough of the Pathfinder Adventure Card Game. So I have the game all set up. This is the first real scenario. There is an introductory scenario, but this is the first full-on scenario inside the storybook. And so I have this all set up, and I'm going to walk through everything that's going on here, and then I'm going to get started playing and teaching you guys a bit of how to play. Just like the RPG that inspired this card game, and this card game is based on, this game contains several different types of dice. So I'm going to go through all of those in case you're not familiar with them. First, you have the four-sided die, and this is known as a D4. The next type of die that you are probably all familiar with, you may know a lot of these, but this one you are definitely aware of. This is the D6, the six-sided die. Now, you may notice a little pattern that's starting to emerge. You have D for die, and then you have the number of sides. So, D6 is a six-sided die. A D4 is a four-sided die. And then we also have an eight-sided die, a D8. And then we also have a 10-sided die, D10. And then finally, we have a 12-sided die, D12. Now, there's also a 20-sided die, D20, and this is used for pretty much everything inside regular Pathfinder and Dungeons & Dragons, but the card game does not actually use this die. There is a version that I believe does use this D20, but the version I'm using for today's game, which is kind of like the second edition, does not actually use the D20, so this can be set aside. Now, when you just want someone to roll one die of a type, you can just say to roll a D4. When you want someone to roll two dice of a type, you can say roll 2d4, and then the first number is the number of dice, and then the D is die, and then the second number is the number of sides. So that is the language that this game is going to be using. Then I also have this little dice tower that was given to me as handmade, and I'm going to be using this. And then to catch the dice, I have the box lid of the Curses Foiled Again expansion for 5-minute dungeon. This is the perfect size for this dice tower, so I'm just going to be able to drop the dice in here, and they're going to come out, and they won't go flying everywhere, so they'll all be on the camera, which is good. Alright, so that's kind of what's going on with this, and then the dice, and then we have a bunch of cards. So, we have our character card, so I'm going to be using the character Lem, who is a halfling bard, and halflings are, just think generic hobbit, so this guy's basically a hobbit, and he's a bard, and bards are musicians that are able to use magic through the music they play, which is kind of a cool thing, and bards are generally jacks of all trades, masters of none. So this character is able to do pretty much anything, but he might not be very good at any particular thing. He's just kind of well-rounded. This is going to be double-sided on the front side of the card. We're going to have our stats. There are 6 stats. Each one of these stats, as you can see, is listed with a die. My strength is a D4, so whenever I make a strength check, I'm going to be rolling a D4. And then when I do a charisma check, it is going to be a D10, which is much better than the D4, and so I'm better at doing charisma type things. Now, below that, we're also going to have different skills. So, for my intelligence, I have the knowledge trait. When it comes to intelligence checks, I'm going to be rolling a d6, which is kind of run-of-the-mill average. But then, when it's specifically a knowledge check, a knowledge intelligence check, then I'm going to be rolling a d6 and adding a +1 bonus to it because of that +1 bonus there. And then I have all sorts of bonuses when it comes to my charisma. I have a +1 bonus to arcane, a +3 bonus to diplomacy, and then a +1 bonus to divine. And so I'm actually able to cast spells, which is kind of cool. And then we have all of our special abilities here, which I'll read off. They become useful. And then I have the back side of the card, which gives you some flavor text for the character, and then tells you how to build their deck. So you're going to have a 15-card deck here, and these are all the numbers of the amounts of that type you can have. And then you will notice that there's all sorts of these boxes here, right? So there's also some on this card over here, this side. At the end of each game, or at the end of most games, you're going to get what's called a hero point. You're able to use these hero points for various things. The coolest thing you're going to be able to do with them is gain feats. And every time you get a feat, you're going to be able to shade in one of those boxes and gain something. So right now, I can have one weapon in my deck, but once I gain a feat and I can shade in this, or you can write down on an index card or piece of paper or anything like that if you don't want to write on your physical cards. But then I'll be able to have 2 weapons in my deck. And then over here, we have a d4 for my strength, but then I can shade in this box here, and then I have a d4 +1 for my strength. So you can kind of increase your stats and abilities as the game goes on, and eventually you're going to be able to take one of these roll cards, which is double-sided. It's like a subclass you can take to further customize your character, which will give you all sorts of different abilities and things that you can do, which is really cool. So I mentioned this deck, and this deck is all shuffled up and made with the cards listed on the back here, and you have a decent amount of freedom when it comes to what cards you can put in, as long as you follow the restrictions for the quantities of the different types in your deck. Then, we also have all these cards out here, and this is basically the scenario. So first, we have this deck here. This is called the Hourglass deck, and this, as you may guess, is the timer. So this has 30 cards in it. Each turn, we're going to be flipping over one of these. So we have 30 turns to complete the scenario's objective. Then we also have a danger here. This is a story bane, which is turned into a danger. There's all sorts of different types of story banes, and the scenario is going to depict how they come into the game and how often they come into the game. This one is going to be a danger inside this particular scenario, which means that it is going to be a event that happens often. So it's collapse, and so we know that there's going to be a bunch of collapsing going on in this scenario. There's also different villains that could show up, and villains often, defeating them is usually a priority, and is the victory condition. And then you also have henchmen. This scenario also has henchmen, and with henchmen, you're able to take them out. They're not full-on villains, but they are kind of almost mini-bosses. And so then you're going to be able to progress through the scenario by defeating them, although they aren't usually necessary to defeat. So you may be asking, all right, where are these henchmen that you're talking about? Well, they are in these locations. So the scenario book tells us which locations to use. So if we open up to the scenario we're doing, which is called Plans Gone Wrong, so it's going to tell you down here which locations to use, and the number by it is denoting which player counts to use that for. So for player count 1, you're going to use the ruins and the tower locations, and I have these set out here. Each location card is going to have a bunch of information on it. You have a picture, which is cool looking, and then you have some abilities, and then actually over here, it's going to tell you how to build this deck. So at the beginning of the game, you can choose if you want it to be a small, medium, or large location, and this will allow you to control the difficulty as well as the length of the game. An average game, the box says, it takes about 90 minutes. I think for a one-player game, it takes more around 30 minutes, but you can decrease that length by using small locations and removing cards from the timer, or you can make it into a longer game by making these locations have large sizes and adding more cards to the timer, and then it tells you all the different types here. So we add into this ruin location, we add 2 monster cards for a medium location, and then we have 3 barriers, 1 weapon, 1 spell, 1 armor, then finally 1 item. And so it kind of tells you what's in it and how to build it, and it's going to be different for each location. And so you kind of know sort of what you're going to be finding. This tower does not have as many barriers, but it has an equal amount of monsters, but it has actually more blessing cards. So if you're trying to get blessings, you can go here. Then you're going to take cards from the box, which is actually just right over here, because as you're playing this game, you're going to want to keep the box handy, because you're going to often be taking cards out of the box and putting the cards back in the box as you play. You're going to take those cards of those types, and you're going to build decks without looking, of course, at what you're taking, and you're just going to take random cards. And then you're also going to shuffle in any henchmen and villains into these locations randomly. And so I have no idea which henchmen are inside these decks. I know over here which storybanes to use. That is way out of focus. There we go. So the danger is collapse. There is no villain for this scenario. And then the henchmen, and these are specifically closing henchmen, which I'll explain what that means when it becomes relevant, but it tells you which ones to use. So we have the Kobold Champion, and then we have, the name is Cesarak, and then we also have a Diabolical Imp, which is Harzogapas. And then you're also going to have a Clockwork Guardian, which does not have a name. Usually they don't have names. And then you're also going to have the Elementals, which is Proxy A. Now, the way this works is that you are going to look at the number of locations we have. So in this case, it's 2. And you're going to go from top to bottom. So, because we just have 2, we're just going to use the top 2. So, the Kobold Champion and the Diabolical Imp. And those are going to be shuffled into the locations. If we had a 3rd location, then we'd also shuffle up the Clockwork Guardian. And then if we have 4, then we'd put in Elemental. If we had 5, we'd put in 2 Elementals, and so on and so forth. Just to clarify, those names in parentheses just tie into the story, and the cards themselves do not actually have those names printed on them. And so then you could have a champion named Cesarak, and then you could also have a champion named Jimmy. For example, I don't think there's actually a Kobold champion named Jimmy, but the scenario book could tell you to do that. Listed in this book, you also have the during the scenario rules. So it says, when you encounter a Bane, you may succeed at a Knowledge or Perception 5 check to evade it. And then to win, close all locations. So each scenario is going to have different special rules, and this one has a little bit more, and some of them have quite a bit, and so those are all going to change up the scenario, and these are just rules that apply just to this scenario. And then finally, you're also going to have a reward, and this one just says each character gains a hero point, which again will allow you to gain new feats, and actually it could prevent you from dying, which is also a good thing because this game does have permadeath. If you run out of hit points, your character's dead, and you have to create a new character, and start the campaign over. Alright, so we also have a bunch of flavor text here, and I'm not actually going to read this. I'm going to let you guys experience the story for yourselves and not read through all of that. I'm just going to get straight into the game. So I've set up pretty much everything. The last thing is we have a character pawn that goes with our character. Alright, so it has Lem there, and it has a little symbol there to note that's from the core game, and then you're just going to put it inside this stand like this, and it's all good. And these are lower quality than Paizo's normal Pathfinder pawns, but they're still pretty cool. You're going to be able to choose which location to start at unless the game says otherwise. So let's see which one to go to. I think I'm going to start at the tower, because the tower has some special abilities that seem pretty good, and I'll explain that in just a bit. Then we're going to be able to draw up to our hand size and then start playing. Each character has a hand size printed here, and of course you can increase that as the campaign goes on, and this is just with your abilities here. You're going to be able to draw that many cards from the top of your deck, and that is going to be your hand, and at the end of each turn you're going to draw up to your hand size. So before I look at my cards, I need to choose a favorite card type. Now, each character has what's called a favorite card type, and it usually is printed. For example, Ezrin here is a human wizard, and his favorite card type is a spell. So, at the beginning of the game, when you draw your starting hand, if you do not have a spell in your hand, you're going to discard your hand, draw a new hand of cards, check to see if you then have a spell, or whatever your favorite card type is, and then if you don't, you do the same thing again until you have a hand which has your favorite card type in it, just at least one card that belongs to that type. And then you're going to shuffle up all the cards you discarded back into your deck so you still have your full deck there. So you're just going to be able to start the game with a card type that your character really works well with, so that you're kind of not completely left to the whims of chance. For the Bard, it is very interesting because the Bard is actually able to kind of specialize however you want it to. And as a result, you actually get to choose the favorite card type each game. So before I look at my hand, I have to choose a card type, and then I have to have at least one of those cards inside my hand for it to be a valid starting hand. I think I actually am going to start with a spell in my hand, so that's going to be my favorite card type for this game. So I'm going to check, do I have a spell? And I do. I have Lightning Touch, which is a spell, and so I'm going to be able to keep this hand. But we have an Archer, who's an ally, with Lightning Touch, Bracers of Protection, Spyglass, a Troubadour, and a Prayer Blessing. So those are all the cards we're going to be able to use, and I will again explain what those do in just a bit. So let's get started. Now, what do you do on your turn? Alright, so on your turn, you're going to take a number of steps in this order. First, you are going to advance the hour. So let's do that real quick. We're going to take the top card of this deck and place it in the discard pile, but we need to keep an eye out for this special ability right here. It says, when this is the hour, on your checks, while you avenge, bless. So, this has a bunch of keywords in it, so it's gonna need some translation. So while this card is the top card of the Hourglass discard pile, it is known as the Hour. And you're going to be able to avenge, when you avenge someone else's check, which is actually not going to matter in the solo game, but in a multiplayer game, or when you're controlling two or more characters, if a character fails a check, then you are able to bury a card from your hand, removing it from the game, removing it from the current game, and then you are able to attempt to make that check yourself. And so, again, that's not going to matter in a solo game, but when you do that in a multiplayer game, you're going to be able to bless, which means that you're going to take a second die of a die type that you already have. So if I am rolling a d10, I'm allowed to take a second d10 when I bless. But again, that's not really going to matter. And so each turn there's going to be some sort of slight benefit based off of each hour type. The top card of the Hourglass. Now, not all those are actually positive. Some of them can be negative, but there's going to be some sort of slight rule change. Very slight, very simple. And then we're going to be able to check for start of turn effects. And so, right here, we actually have a ability on the tower here that says, at this location, at the start of your turn, you may examine the top card of a distant location. So, I'm going to be able to look at the top card of a distant location. Now, there's two different types of locations. There's local location, which is where your character is, and then there's distant locations, which is any location where your character isn't. So, I'm on the tower, and I'm looking out, and I look over to the ruins and see a dire boar. And so this is going to have some different stats here. This is how we fight it. We're going to need to roll a combat check of 10, and then another combat check of 11, and there's some abilities here. And so I'm just going to read through this real quick. It says, when you would reveal a melee weapon on the check to defeat, recharge it instead. If defeated, but either check to defeat was not exceeded by at least 4, suffer 1d4 combat damage. Alright, so we know that this boar is on top of the ruin deck,
And so we can kind of be prepared when we go over there. Next up, we can, there are no abilities on my character card, so I'm just going to be able to move on into the next step, which would be giving a card to another character. So, if I am in the same location as a character, if we're both in the same local location, then I can take any card from my hand and give it to any player. And so then we can kind of, give cards to each other. And so if someone needs help, maybe their character can't use armor at the beginning of they can't have armor inside their starting deck, such as Lem here. My deck can't contain any armor at the beginning of the game. Well, then a fighter or a paladin could hand Lem some armor to borrow for that game, so that would give him some more protection. So you're able to do that. But again, solo game does not matter. Then I may move to a distant location. So I can move over to the ruins here if I wanted to fight that boar, for example. I actually think I'm going to stay here, but I could do that. And then we can explore the top card of our location. So that's going to be the meat of our turn, where we are going to be able to explore. We explore, it's very simple. You're just going to draw the top card of the deck and resolve it. Alright, so this is a Yeth Hound, and it is a monster. That little number there is the level, and so it's a level 1 monster, and it has a check to defeat, which is a combat 10. So we're going to make a combat check and roll higher than a 10. Now, it also has some powers here. It says, before acting, each local character must succeed a Wisdom 5 check or suffer the Scourge Frightened. And then it says, if the hour's level is 0, after the encounter, each local character suffers 1d4 mental damage that may not be reduced. So, let's go through each one of those. We have before acting, and then we have a after acting, so we can actually ignore this for now and then go right up here. It says before acting, each local character must succeed a Wisdom 5 check or suffer the Scourge Frightened. Now, what do Scourges do? We have all these different Scourges here, and these are basically negative conditions. So, where is the Scourge Frightened? There it is. Alright, so the Scourge Frightened says, while marked, when you encounter a monster, suffer 1d4 -1 mental damage that cannot be reduced. When your location is closed, you may remove this Scourge. So, we do not want to get this Frightened Scourge because that's going to be dealing damage to us over time. So, I don't want to get that. So let's see if I can avoid this. I need to succeed a Wisdom 5 check, or suffer the Scourge Frightened. So, again, our Wisdom is D6. So, I can take a D6, and I'll just put that right there. Then, I'm able to play any cards that I would like to do. And this will allow me to increase my dice that I roll. So we have this Prayer Blessing here. On any check, discard to Bless. And we can also discard this card to examine the top card of your location. Then you may explore. So I could keep this card and discard it later to explore after actually peeking at the top card of the deck. Normally you just get one Explore per turn. And with this card, it would give me a second Explore. But I could also discard this card to Bless. Alright, let's see, anything else that helps me? Alright, this Troubadour, on a local Charisma or Diplomacy check, non-combat check, sorry, it's very specific there, non-combat, recharge to add 1d6. Now, couple different differences here. When you discard a card, you're going to place it in your discard pile. When you recharge a card, you're going to take it and put it at the bottom of your deck. And then you also have reloading. When you reload a card, you're going to put it on top of your deck. And then you also have banishing. When you banish a card, you put it back in the box. So it's kind of like a one-time use thing there. So we can recharge this card to add 1d6 to our Charisma and Diplomacy. Doesn't help us. It also has discard to Explore. This exploration on your Charisma non-combat check and Diplomacy non-combat checks add 1d6. So that doesn't help us at all. Archer. On a local Dexterity or Range check, recharge to add 1d4, discard to Explore this exploration. On your Dexterity and Range checks, add 1d4. Again, doesn't help us. Lightning Touch. This is a combat ability, which I'm actually going to probably end up using this for the fighting, but right now I need to do this Wisdom thing. But I'll read that later. Braces of Protection. When you suffer combat damage, freely reveal to reduce it by 1. Okay. When you suffer any damage, recharge it to reduce it by 1. Okay, so that's some armor there, basically. Not quite armor, it's an item, but it's kind of like armor. On your perception check, reveal to add 1d6. Discard to examine the top 2 cards of your location and return them in any order. Okay, it's not going to help us. So the only thing that will help us is this prayer card here. Now, this game has a lot of like push your luck type elements. I could roll this die and hope to get a 5 or greater and succeed. But of course, that's not very likely. So I could use this to add another d6 to my check, and then I would have an extra d6 to roll, and so rolling 2d6 to get a 5 is actually a much greater chance. Now, for some reason, I do not actually have a second d6 here. I thought I did. It's not here. I wonder if I dropped it or something. I don't know. I'll look for it later, but since I only have one, I'll just roll this one twice. So that would be a good idea, possibly. But the thing you need to realize, and I have not explained this yet, your cards are your health. If you ever run out of cards in your discard pile and you need to draw another card, you die. And you now need to create a new character. And all of your upgrades and everything like that go away. So you do not want to die. So it's really a push your luck type game. Do I discard this card or save it? Now, if I discard it, I'm losing 1 out of 15 hit points. But if I do not discard it and I don't get an extra die to roll, then there's a chance I'll get that frightened ability, which be really bad. So I do think that discarding it is probably a good idea, just to make sure that I actually do succeed this check. So without further ado, let's make that check. Alright, this is a 2, so it's a good thing I blessed, because I'm going to roll again. Alright, 6, so total 8. So I do succeed that check, so I do not become frightened, and then there's a check to defeat, which is a combat check of 10. So I need to deal 10 damage to him, basically. I need to roll 10 or greater. Now, so for my combat check, it's going to be slightly different. It's not just a base skill that I have listed here. Instead, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using this spell. And this will give me some dice to use for my combat check, if it focuses. There we go. Alright, so it says, for your combat check, banish to use Arcane plus 2d4. If the check is against a monster, ignore its after-acting powers. Okay, so I'm going to play this card, and so I get my Arcane plus 2d4. So first, we have Arcane. Now, what's my Arcane? Well, my Arcane skill is listed under Charisma. So my Arcane is Charisma. So I'll take 1d10. 1d10 here, and one thing about the 1d10, the 0 on it is not a 0. That 0 is actually a 10. But it's just one digit. Then I also get 2d4. Alright, so now I've got 3 dice there. And then, after using this, I actually get to ignore the nasty after-acting abilities on this card. Now, this actually wouldn't do anything, because it says if the hours level is 0, then we do the bad thing, but the hours level is actually 3, so that's actually not going to do anything anyway, but there's sometimes abilities where you're fighting against an archer, he shoots you before you fight him, you fight him, and then he shoots you again. This would stun him, so he can't shoot you a second time, for example, which is pretty cool. So, I am going to check to see if I want to do anything else. So nothing here really isn't going to help me that much for my Arcane check. Now, I actually am pretty confident that I'm going to be able to make this, because I have a d10 and 2 d4s, and then I have a +1. So, chances are pretty decent that I'm going to be able to get 10. Now, anything could happen, so actually, let's real quick look at these powers on here, and I probably should have done this earlier, but let's see. On a local non-combat check, and then it has a feat there to upgrade it, or another local character's combat check, so you can kind of upgrade that and make it more powerful. You may recharge a card to add 1d4, and then 1d6 if you upgrade it. So, I actually could have recharged any card from my hand to add 1d4 to my last check, which could have prevented me from needing to discard this bless here, but oh well, I forgot about that. That doesn't do anything because this is a combat check. Then, at the end of your turn, you may discard a card to recharge, or shuffle into your deck, a card from your discards. So, I can discard a card from my hand to take a card from my discard pile and put it back on my deck. If there's a card that doesn't really benefit me right now, it's kind of more situational or something like that, I can discard it and then recharge a card that is more useful for me. So that's kind of cool. I'll be able to recycle things, because unless you have some sort of healing ability or some ability like that, the cards in your discard pile are in your discard pile, and you probably won't be able to play them again. So you do not want to have to discard cards. Alright, so let's go ahead and roll these dice. Alright, so we have a 6 here, and then we have a 4. So that's 10, and then we have a 1, that's 11, and then we have a +1. So that is going to be 12. And that is going to be enough to defeat this Yethhound. So, we defeat him, and he's going to go back in the box. Now, let's just say we had rolled lower than 10. We would subtract what we rolled from his combat value, and that is how much damage he would do to us. And then we need to discard cards from our hand to suffer the damage. So, if we had been dealt 2 damage, we'd have to discard these 2 cards here. Or any 2 cards from our hand. The larger your hand size is, the more you are able to have different options and have flexibility and things like that. But you also are more susceptible to huge attacks. A fighter who only has 4 cards in his hand can, at most, be dealt 4 damage. But a bard who has 6 cards in his hand could be dealt 6 damage at most. And again, this is all out of 15. That's an interesting little element there. Now, actually, I just realized that the wording on this does actually matter. So it says, if the hours level is 0 after the encounter, each local character suffers 1d4 mental damage. That may not be reduced. And then this says, if the check is against a monster, ignore its after acting powers. I apologize because those aren't the same thing. So the Lightning Touch does not actually eliminate the Yethhound's ability. It still goes off. So we still have to check the level here, which again is 3, so it still doesn't do anything, but just thought I should clear that up because it actually still goes off. That was my mistake. Then we can go back to doing whatever we want, playing our cards and things like that. So I could discard this Archer, for example, to explore again, or I could discard this Troubadour to explore again, but I do not actually think I want to. I'm going to go to the next step here, which is end of turn, apply end of turn effects, do recovery, then reset. So we have end of turn effects. Do we have anything at our location? So the tower just has a start of turn ability, and then it tells you how to close it or what to do when closed. Those don't matter right now. So we also have an end of turn ability on our character, so we can discard a card from our hand to recharge a card from our discard pile. I think I'm not going to do that. I think I will keep the cards I have in my hand for now. I might change that later, but for now I'll just do that. And then we go on to recovery. Now, this has a during recovery ability, which says, if proficient, discard this card. You may succeed at an arcane or divine 6 check to recharge it instead. So, the card tells us to banish it. When we banish it, at the end of our turn, we are going to remove this from the game by putting it back in the box. It's no longer in our deck. But if we're proficient, then we are able to put it in our discard pile instead. Now, our proficiencies are listed here. And, as you can see, we are proficient with Arcane, Divine, and Instruments. This card is an Arcane ability here. There's different traits here, so it's Magic, Arcane, an Attack, and Electricity, and those traits may be referenced by other things. For example, I am proficient in this card, so I am able to do better things with this. Or there might be a card that says this monster is weak versus electricity, so then the electricity does more damage. Various things like that. So, then, I actually, since I'm proficient, it goes in the discard pile. But I can make an Arcane or Divine check of 6 to recharge it instead. And if I do that, it goes at the bottom of my deck. So, if it's banished, it's out of the game until I acquire it again from finding it in a location. If I discard it, it is out of this game unless I heal. If I recharge it, it is momentarily out of this game. It's not in my hand. I won't be able to use it for a little while, but then it'll recharge, the cooldown will go off, and then I'll be able to go back into my hand after I draw it, but it'll be at the bottom of my deck. If I reload it, I'm just not going to get it this turn, but next turn I'll get it, just because it's on top of my deck. So, I can make a check of 6 to recharge it instead. So, again, my Arcane is under Charisma, which is a 1d10, and I have a +1 to it. So, I think there's a 50-50 chance of me doing this, and there's nothing else I can use. Actually, no, I can actually use something. This is a local non-combat check, so I can recharge a card to add 1d4. So I think I am going to recharge my archer here, and I am going to add 1d4 to my check. So I have 1d10 and then a 1d4, and I'm trying to get a 6, but I do have a +1. Alright, so you may feel your heart sink for a little bit, but then you remember that is not a 0, but a 10. So we have 10 plus 3 plus 1, and so we definitely do succeed that 6 check there, and then this is going to go on the bottom of our deck. Finally, we're going to reset. We're going to check the number of cards in our hand. If we have more than our hand size, which is, again, 6, then we are going to discard cards down to 6 cards in our hand. If we have fewer than 6 cards, like we do now, we only have 3, we're going to draw up to 6 cards. So we have 3 more cards here, and then that goes into our hand to create 6 cards in our hand. And that is the first turn. And so I'm actually going to stop the episode here, and I'm going to pick it up next time, and we're actually going to be able to go through several turns, and probably the good part of an entire game. This was kind of the introduction, going through what everything does. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you all will join me next time as I actually get into the meat of the game. And in the meantime, I hope you all have a great day, and happy gaming!